SCRAT, a fictional saber-toothed squirrel who loves to get himself injured, all because of his nuts. In the past, I've looked at a couple of SCRAT's most deadly moments and analyzed them mathematically, but because I absolutely love to waste time, and because I always go overboard with how much work I do, I've decided to figure out how many times our beloved hideous rat would die throughout every single theatrical film. In this video, we're starting off with Ice Age and Ice Age: The Meltdown. In a video later this year, I will cover the third and fourth films, and perhaps if there's time, I may even do the fifth. And I know I'm gonna get some idiot commenting, "It's just a kid's movie, it's not meant to be realistic." And that's obviously true. I'm just stating what would happen to him in the real world. So the dillies have been dallied, let's jump into this head first. Hello, And if we scurry back to SCRAT's debut, we get the ultimate slapstick session. He sticks an acorn into the ground and it cracks up a massive glacier. Then it slides down the side of a hill into another glacier, causing SCRAT to get pinned in the middle. He gives Friction the middle finger and then slides on his acorn right to the edge of the glaciers, and then he gets stuck. So our death counter clearly has 1 on it. Nobody could survive this. You see, if these glaciers are 1,000 feet tall, wide, and thick, even then, they'd still each weigh around 28.6 imperial tons. So SCRAT's dead no matter what. That's far too much to handle, and he'd be crushed, obviously. But then he flings out through the air into the open sky. Quite clearly, he's high enough up to reach terminal velocity. That's the point where the wind is blowing so fast on you that you stop getting faster. You'll feel like you're in zero gravity, and luckily, I happen to know the terminal velocity of a saber-toothed squirrel. How, you may ask? Because I calculated it before in one of my older Ice Age videos. SCRAT maxes out at a speed of 1,680 kilometers per hour, or 1,050 miles an hour. Jeez, now I actually start to feel bad for him. But then he hits a rough patch. This is really a 50-50 chance of death. He slides, but there's a good chance he'd either slam into the rock or get his organs ground down as he slid on the abrasive surface. This same 50-50 rule applies to the collective subsequent slamming fest that follows. The landing speeds decreased massively, but there's still enough damage to do at least something to him. Then SCRAT is repeatedly crushed by the feet of animals who weigh of up to 10 tons. And 4 of the 5 animals are heavy enough to, yes, completely kill him. And that's it for SCRAT. For now. We later find him attempting to hide his acorn yet again, except it's stormy out and he's in a tree. Conclusion? Electrically induced cardiac arrest. An average lightning storm outputs 30,000 amps per shock, which is pretty stunning. Literally. Since it takes a mere 1/10 of 1 ampere to shut off the human heart, that's frighteningly deadly. Now, of course, SCRAT isn't a human, he's a rodent, but that is even more reason to be afraid. That tiny little frail heart of his, oh, the humanity. He may have a ton of resistance in his fur and skin, but still, look at that number. Insanity. Ohm's law states that on a dry human, that would equate to around 3 billion volts. On a wet one, 30 million. And on SCRAT, somewhere high up there too. This scenario's result is no exaggeration. Here be death. SCRAT makes a couple more appearances here and there, but his next big moment is when Diego flicks him and he slides down a hill, becoming a snowball. I don't think this one is too majorly deadly, but there's still the chance of suffocation within the snowball, and according to my calculations, the instantaneous acceleration is around 10.5 Gs. What that means is that in this exact moment when he's being flung, he'll feel like he weighs 10 times as much as normal because the force is so hard on him. As ridiculous as this may sound, he, again, has about a 50-50 chance of surviving this, so we'll count that as such. Next, we see SCRAT much later in the film. He's in the ice caverns when Sid, Diego, and Manfred all slide into him. After measuring and figuring out some things, it's concluded that they were all sliding at around 20 kilometers an hour. Combined with each of their weights, we can mess with kinetic energy and work to find the force. They all slide pretty far into the snow block, 3 feet at minimum. So with all of this in consideration, Sid would slam into SCRAT with 158 newtons, and the others with a much higher 3,172 newtons for Diego, and 144,000 for Manny. So Sid wouldn't kill him, but the collective piling of Diego and Manny most likely would. This probably warrants SCRAT one more death. Finally, he causes a volcano to erupt. This one's impossible to figure out because we see nothing really happen, but probability suggests that he's far enough from the volcano to survive, so this one can probably be omitted. We're so far on a roll. Let's migrate to the meltdown. Assuming SCRAT can actually cling to a wall of ice like some sort of freaky demon, he could not survive the inflation that later occurs. Scientifically, his esophagus would be pumping overtime to swallow all of that water, which is impossible. It's far more likely that he'd drown, or, if his lips really do grip that hard, his cheeks and mouth tissue would rapidly peel away from the pressure, causing his mouth to explode. If his throat really could chug all that H2O, then his stomach would ferociously expand and maybe even burst, which may cause him to become septic or seriously infected, killing him. If that doesn't kill him somehow, then he'd die of water intoxication, though that may take a while. That's basically when you drink so much water that the sodium in your blood drops dramatically, causing a fatal condition called hyponatremia. So basically, SCRAT would die from most likely suffocation or something else. Death point. Then he is in fact blown back, and he falls at, once again, his terminal velocity of 1680 kilometers an hour. Researching his chubby weight, measuring his speed before and after this first whammy slam, putting it through momentum formulas and figuring out a few more values, we're left with a slamming force of 14,615 newtons. SCRAT! That's around 1.5 tons of force, which is crushing him. This is death. But his next 2 hits are very minimal forces and have no deaths. The final one, however, is around 86 newtons, or 20 pounds. All things considered, the final one is around 0.5. He then is hilariously slammed into by someone on the slide, but SCRAT is small enough that this won't injure him. Now let's move on to the rest of the movie. His antics with the cylindrical block of ice. None of it's really deadly. Rats are known to be able to fit through anything they can get their head into. None of this slapstick is harmful until the end when he falls a large distance onto another chunk of ice. Comparing the icy cylinder to SCRAT and measuring its volume and density, it reveals to weigh about 0.686 kilograms or 1.5 pounds. This fall lands him on his head, and after the measurements, this works out to landing him at around 4 meters a second, meaning 215 newtons, or almost 50 pounds of force on his head. But I'm still skeptical about the whole scenario since he had a decent amount of buffering distance, so I'll give it a 0.5 again. SCRAT then makes a poorly staged attempt at a pole vault and obviously fails. Since water is below him, we can use an extremely rudimentary and crude way to find this force. A really ballpark method Isaac Newton used called impact depth. You see, to find the force, we either need to know the distance it takes him to slow down, or the time it takes. I've managed so far, but water is a tricky one, so we'll have to get a ballpark estimate for the distance he'd fall into the water while still slowing down. We just need to measure him and find out the density of a rodent, which I estimated to be somewhere between a human and a bird. I went with 950 kilograms per meter cubed because of his fluffy fur. All of this proves that he'd have around 0.14687 meters to slow down. We hear him splash, and timing his fall, we know the speed he's falling at. All of this means the force of impact is 4,300 newtons. Probably enough to wind him, and maybe to kill him. I hate having all of these maybes, but it's true. Many of these really are a 50-50 chance. After his vaulting failed, he does a cannonball and is ambushed by a barrage of piranhas. One of them bites his arm, but is small enough to slip through the sharp teeth. SCRAT then demonstrates his jiu-jitsu abilities once again and pwns all of the piranhas. No death here. But when the condor steals his nut, SCRAT goes up there and is shoved out of the nest. One might assume this to be deadly, but I really don't think so. The nest is perched on a tip of ice that goes down like a slide, so SCRAT would just slip down into the water. Probably no death here, but I'm not really certain. During the climax, SCRAT is around when the dam breaks wide open and floods the valley. He appears to be slammed with a shot of water, but it just casually blew him into the nest. It's not that harshly deadly. I've been blasted back with water before, it would just catch him off guard and dazzle him. But what happens next is so mind-bogglingly hilarious and epic that it actually warranted being my very first original Ice Age video. He snaps a dam on the other side of the valley, and his arms would tear off by the stretch of him holding the glaciers together. But then he falls into the water below, and recalculating the number I'd gotten before, he'd slam into the water with approximately 60,700 newtons, enough to kill him instantly and flatten him. But if it didn't kill him, then the intense flow of water definitely would. And it did. Until of course he gets revived by Sid, and uses his jujitsu once again to attack him. So SCRAT, 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 you frighteningly immortal 20,000-year-old furry phallic-looking rat. How come you refused to die? 13 times he'd have died in only the first 2 theatrical Ice Age films. We haven't even covered his continental crack-up or his prehistoric pandemonium or his spatial expedition. Wait till later this year. I simply don't want these videos to be too long, I want to have a physics video reserved for later this year, and I want to see the response to this video before I start going all out with the next 3 films. So until then, you should leave this video with a lesson. Is an acorn really worth all that trouble? As seen in the Gone Nutty short film, SCRAT has a huge tree already full of acorns. I don't know if it's his, I assume it is since they're all so perfectly stuffed in there. So why in the name of SCRAT would he need any more? He's a delusional and obsessed psychopath. Until next time...